Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. Inaugurations of college presidents are often staid, formal affairs full of pomp and grandeur. But when Danielle Holly became president of Mount Holyoke College last year, the ceremony contained all the exuberance of a pep rally. Students waved pom-poms and chanted, "Ha Lee, Ha Lee," and excitement, not formality, was the order of the day. She is the first African American woman to become the permanent president of Mount Holyoke, making her the fourth Black woman to lead one of what were historically known as the Seven Sister Colleges. Today, she'll tell us about the path that led her there, what role women's colleges and the humanities continue to play in a largely co-ed and career-driven world, and what role Black colleges and universities play today. Danielle, as a proud Mount Holyoke alum, I am delighted to have you as a guest today. When I was at Mount Holyoke back in the mid-'60s, there was only a small number of Black students, and there were no Black faculty members and no Blacks in the administration. And now here you are president. And there are quite a number of predominantly white institutions who have Black presidents now, including Wellesley, Oberlin, Trinity, Brown, or who have had Black presidents, Brown University, Harvard University, unfortunately only briefly, Wharton, Swarthmore, Kenyon College, Michigan State, many. What do you think is the message in this huge transformation?
You know, I still think Black college presidents are still in very small numbers outside of historically Black colleges and universities, but we have been presidents many places now. And I think it's a great example for our students. I think our students see us rising in our careers, whether it's like me from a place where I was an attorney, a practicing lawyer, into being a law professor, into being an academic leader, and then to president, or when we see people like Claudine Gay, who rose through the academy to those same positions. But I think it's a very strong message to our students that there is no limit on what you can do, that really it is possible for you to lead. And I think especially for young women, for them to see us be CEOs and to be presidents, I think there's still so few women CEOs and presidents that it's especially important for our students to see women rise to those places of leadership.
And it also seems to say that once you start letting people in who have been excluded for a long time, then they begin to show their talents and they begin to rise to the top. And that's true not just in academia, but in sports, in entertainment, in science, in a lot of fields.
Absolutely. I was just with my college roommate last night, who's the COO of Reddit, and she's one of the most powerful women in corporate America. And I think that's true in so many ways, is that when we come into the door, when the doors are open, we're then able to demonstrate our talents and skills and our belonging within an organization, whether it be a university, a corporation, or a nonprofit.
Tell me about the path you took from a little girl growing up in Houston to being president of Mount Holyoke.
You know, it was a long journey, but in many ways, very consistent with my upbringing. I am the daughter of two academics. My father was a law professor. My mom was an accounting professor at a historically Black college at Texas Southern University in Houston. So I grew up in the university atmosphere and just really loved it. And so for me, in some ways, it was a very natural pathway, but I left home at 18 and went to Yale University, which was a big step for me because I had never really lived outside of Texas. I'd lived for a little bit in Buffalo, New York, but for the most part, very much in that bubble. And then when I came to Yale, really the whole world opened up for me. And so from there, I think I really discovered my love for history. I'm a proud humanities major, a history major, and that led me to wanting to go to law school and then to being an academic and finally wanting to really serve students, which was the reason that I got into academic leadership work.
One time when you were dean of the Howard University Law School, your father was the dean of Texas Southern Law School. I think you were the only father-daughter dean pair.
Yeah, it's amazing. So my dad was dean of Thurgood Marshall School of Law at the same time I was dean of Howard Law School. We're the only father-daughters in the history of the American Bar Association to be deans of two law schools, and we served at the same time, and we also share a name. Okay. So my dad's Danny Holly, I'm Danielle Holly, and so it was amazing. It was really to see his work I think in what he did over the course of a 51-year teaching career, the number of students he impacted, but also his just love and dedication for the historically Black college law school space and for historically Black colleges in general. And I think about the thousands of lawyers that were taught by him, and I meet them all the time, and they tell me what a huge impact my father's teaching and his administrative work had on their lives.
Why Mount Holyoke? Why'd you want to come to Mount Holyoke?
So I think what I saw, at Howard and what I saw at University of South Carolina is the difference that higher ed makes when it's mission driven, right? Mount Holyoke has one of the most important historical legacies of any university or college ever founded in the United States. Being the first of what's known as the Seven Sisters Colleges, Mary Lyon, who founded our college, believed that we could go where no one else could go and do what no one else could do. And that still fuels us, right? This belief that women and people who are marginalized on the basis of gender have a special role to play in our democracy, have a special role to play in terms of breaking glass ceilings and demonstrating what women are really capable of doing here in the United States and around the world.
Now, back in the 60s, there were almost 300 women's colleges.
Yes.
Now there are approximately only 26, most of them private liberal arts colleges. You feel there's still a need for them?
Absolutely. The Mellon Foundation did the first convening ever of all of the women's college presidents. And I think what we saw at that meeting was just the tremendous need for the continuation of women's colleges. So for example, when we think about the space of scientific and medical research, there are still so many areas like cervical cancer, breast cancer, perimenopause and menopause that have not received the attention that they need in terms of scientific research. So much of that work is being done out of women's colleges. Mount Holyoke is still the #1 producer of women who go on to get PhDs in the life sciences.
Right.
So without Mount Holyoke, without places like Mount Holyoke and Smith and Wellesley, we would see a tremendous drop in women scientists, in artists. When I think about the Pulitzer Prize winners, the Academy Award winners that have come from Mount Holyoke, it is really an indispensable place for the United States and around the world. Women's colleges are very much still needed.
You have described Mount Holyoke as a, quote, proudly gender diverse women's college. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so at Mount Holyoke, we are the leading gender diverse women's college. And what that means is under our admission policy, we accept trans women. And we also accept students who are non-binary. So students who say, I don't operate on the gender binary, don't see myself as identifying as a man or a woman, but I am on that gender spectrum. And I think our understanding of gender is very much evolving, but we do understand that it's not static and is not something that's on the binary. And we have lots of students, and I think we have throughout the history of Mount Holyoke, have lots of students who live in the non-binary. And so we're very proud that we were the first to have that kind of inclusive admissions policy. And we believe that that kind of admissions policy is at the heart of what women's colleges do. The idea that marginalization on the basis of gender is something that we are constantly fighting against, fighting gender stereotyping, which is at the core of the Mount Holyoke mission.
Now, you were not there in, I guess it was 2014, when Mount Holyoke adopted that gender diverse policy. But I would imagine that there were certain challenges in making that happen. Dormitory accommodations, who gets assigned to be with whom, is an issue for prospective students who have been admitted. Do you ask if there's a problem, being assigned to a room with someone who is transgender? Is that or do you just assume that anybody comes? You tell anybody who comes that this is who we are, and you have to accept that. How does that work?
We definitely tell everyone who arrives at Mount Holyoke College that this is who we are, right? So they can expect to meet students who are cisgender women. They can expect to meet students who were assigned female at birth and who are now consider themselves to be non-binary. They may meet someone who's a trans man, right, who is on our campus. So we do, and our students, I think the difference in generation is that students think much less about gender being so binary as we do, right? And so even as someone who's a member of Gen X, I'm always learning more, but I think our students right now don't see gender as much of an issue as we do. So we never hear, I don't want to be assigned with this person,
Yeah.
but instead they think of it as very much just a part of the identity of our students,
Well,
is
that's a nice sense.
that they may identify in lots of different ways gender-wise, but it doesn't impact the way that they see each other. They're all Mount Holyoke students and they live in the same dorms and in the same rooms and very much have that sense of, so when we say we're gender inclusive, we mean that we are very much gender inclusive. We do not make distinctions between students based on their gender identity when we assign them to dorms or rooms, et cetera.
Do you have any special kinds of education programs to prepare people, students or faculty or staff, for what it means to be gender inclusive?
Absolutely, we have to. So for example, when I came to Mount Holyoke, our wonderful Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion taught me a lot about language that surrounds gender inclusive students and the way that we refer to people across the gender spectrum. That was a very important thing for me to learn, and I'm still learning. So absolutely, we have lots of education, and we're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of our inclusive admission policy this year. So we take the opportunity to celebrate our transgender and gender nonconforming community, which we're doing this year. It's called TGNC 10, but we also have, Trans Day of Visibility and all kinds of programs and opportunities to really celebrate our gender inclusivity and to talk about the issues that surround still having lots of people in this country who fight against things like gender affirming care.
Right.
We want to make sure that we're speaking out on behalf of our students and saying people are entitled to gender affirming care and really to have the justice and just respect that all human beings are due. And we want to make sure that Mount Holyoke stands for that.
I certainly noticed at your inauguration ceremony that whenever a person got up to speak, they gave their name and their title and always gave their pronouns. And I had not seen that before.
So we are one of the few schools, and it's interesting because we're seeing a big change, for example, in Title IX. For the first time in the country's history, Title IX now covers pronouns, and Title IX now prohibits misgendering students. So it's very important. Mount Holyoke, again, is leading in this area. We adopted a pronoun policy a few years ago where we do always talk about our pronouns. So when I introduce myself at events, I always say, I'm Danielle Holly and my pronouns are she, her. And we do that so that we don't misgender each other. But I think we'll see that becoming more prominent as people recognize that gender identity discrimination is a form of gender discrimination, right? And it's covered by our civil rights laws, including Title IX. And so while Mount Holyoke has been leading, you'll see lots of other institutions that will be introducing things like pronoun policies, I believe, in order to ensure that people's civil rights are respected.
Yeah. There's been a lot of debate in recent years, over the value of offering courses in the humanities. Things like foreign languages, literature, philosophy, religion, art, music, history, versus offering courses that lead more directly to jobs and careers. Where do you stand in that debate?
I think humanities is the basis of everything that we do in higher education. And we know that when you produce scientists who don't have the context of the humanities, that they are very different. So for example, we start all of our biology students in Biology 101 at Mount Holyoke. You go to the art museum on the very first day and look at photographs and also drawings of the human body, right? So you get to have that emotional connection to the people who you'll treat and to the body itself, right? So we believe that the scientists we produce from Mount Holyoke are fundamentally different because they're exposed to art, they're exposed to music. And I think the other thing that the humanities does is it really allows students to have choice. So when I taught last semester, I had 23 students in my seminar, 19 of them were double majors. So to see someone who's a double major in neurobiology and music or biology and art is really inspiring. And as a humanities major myself, history, I can't imagine a better major to prepare me for everything that I've done, whether it's being a practicing lawyer or being an academic leader. my training in history, the training in the humanities has been the essential grounding that I need. And I've seen that among my friends who I graduated from, those of us who are humanities majors have stretched our wings in so many different ways. And I think the loss of the humanities, if we allow that to happen, and I don't think we should in higher ed, will be a detriment to our country and a detriment to our democracy.
Yeah.
Because sorting misinformation and disinformation, things like that, you need grounding in
Okay.
the liberal arts. You need grounding in the humanities.
I know there are some colleges that have eliminated some of their humanities courses. Has Mount Holyoke eliminated any courses?
No, we were just talking about that today. So, for example, we have a very strong theater department. I saw our students last semester perform a play called Marisol. When I tell you, seeing students who are emerging in their identities as young people from 18 to 21 perform in theater, these are some people who will later go on to be doctors,
Yeah.
later go on to be engineers, later go on to be lawyers and business people and finance people. But for that moment, they're performing in an excellent production through theater at Mount Holyoke. And so we have not. We have doubled down and committed more to theater, to art, to music, to English, to history, because we believe that the humanities really is the grounding for everything else that you would want to do and achieve post higher education.
In interviews that you've given recently, you've criticized the Supreme Court's decision last year banning the consideration of race in college admissions. Tell me about that.
I think the Supreme Court's decision overturning affirmative action will be seen as one of the lowest points in Supreme Court history. I think along with them overturning reproductive rights in the Dobbs decision, they're overturning long-term precedent. So people talk about Roe versus Wade as a long-term precedent. 50 years it was overturned. Affirmative action precedent going back to Bakke in the 1970s was almost just as old, was 50 years old. And then the Supreme Court says that racial diversity, they are skeptical about whether it's a compelling government interest, and that Harvard and UNC did not follow all of the proper protocols for that. I think it is really demonstrates how out of touch the court is with where we are in society. In the United States, we're becoming additionally racially and ethnically diverse. Any college or university who ignores the importance of racial and ethnic diversity won't have any relevance moving into the next 50 years. So it's another place where the Supreme Court has demonstrated that they are isolated and that they are out of touch with everyday Americans and what people want in their institutions. And what I would call on colleges and universities to do is not to abandon, and our corporations, not to abandon the importance of racial and ethnic diversity, but instead to double down and say, even though the Supreme Court has made the wrong decision, we believe that this is incredibly important to our institutions, and we will follow all legal means, but we will have racial and ethnic diversity in our institutions, because without it, we know that we can't be relevant and we can't educate leaders for the next century, for the next 50 years, without helping them to live in a global,
Right.
global community.
And I was reading just recently that at a number of colleges, MIT, Tufts, Amherst, UNC, reported a sharp drop in the number of black students this year following the Supreme Court decision. Now, you attended Yale, and an Ivy Leaguer. You attended Yale and Harvard University, but you worked for 9 years at Howard University's School of Law. What role do you see HBCUs playing in a time when smart young women like you can go to Yale, can go to Harvard?
You know, I think the role that historically black colleges and universities play in the United States is absolutely critical and central. What I observed in my 9 years at Howard was just that, 70% of all black judges in the United States went to a historically black college.
70%?
70% of all black judges. It's more than that for black doctors being educated either undergrad or for medical school at a historically black college. Historically black colleges are still playing an incredibly outsized role in producing black doctors, lawyers, engineers, computer scientists. So a former president of GW University, of George Washington University, said, Howard is sui generis. If we didn't have it, we would need to create it, right? To have the United States that we have now. So when you think of people, everyone from people like Thurgood Marshall to Debbie Allen to Kamala Harris, all educated at Howard, right? And so you think what our country would look like without a place like Howard, and you wouldn't recognize it, right? And that's true going all the way back from 1867 when Howard was founded, and many historically black colleges founded around that same time, all the way up to today. That when you look at the resumes and the backgrounds of so many people who are leading in our country who are people of African descent, so that means not just American, but Caribbean and also African. When you look at people of African descent around the world, places like Howard are indispensable for providing the education that then leads to the leadership opportunities that we've seen.
The Ivies get a lot of credit for being defenders of affirmative action, as in the Harvard lawsuit. But I had a guest on several months ago. He's a professor at Brooklyn College, John Jay College, who wrote a book called Poison Ivy. And he was maintaining that the real affirmative action, the most affirmative, is done by the HBCUs.
What did they mean by that?
Well, those are the places that give more people of color opportunity.
Yes, yes. And so it's interesting having, I think, the education. So for example, when I went to Yale, we had about 1,000 students who graduated in my class, and there were only about 90 black students. And so when you sit at graduation at Howard and you watch almost 500 PhDs, newly minted PhDs walk across the stage, you think, probably they haven't produced that many black PhDs in all of the other 3,800 colleges and universities in the United States this year.
Right.
Right. So that's absolutely true. So when my class of 150 black lawyers would graduate every year from the law school, I would know that we were doing more work at that graduation. If there are 200 law schools in the United States, we probably did more work graduating black lawyers on that one day than almost all the other law schools combined.
How big is the Howard?
Howard is a small law school, so it's about 450 students.
Okay. Since we're talking about law school, you have a law degree. You said you wanted to be a lawyer from the time you were a little girl, and now you're a college president. The law degree seems to be a very foundational for many different kinds of careers.
Yeah, I think the law degree mirrors liberal arts colleges in many ways, right? So that emphasis on critical analysis, critical thinking, critical writing, those are the skills that I think put you in a place where you can do lots of different things. It's so interesting that there's a whole new group of liberal arts college presidents who are lawyers and former law deans, because I think that understanding that, reading literature can add to your ability to be an outstanding lawyer. Understanding science, understanding biology or chemistry can be, very foundational to you being an excellent lawyer. So it's a profession that encourages knowledge, encourages intellectual growth when done in the best ways. Of course, we've seen the tremendous ethical lapses for lots of lawyers when you think about all of the chaos we've seen in our democracy, so much of it caused by lawyers. And so there's a real need also for increased, I think, focus on ethics and foundational democratic values for everyone who's being educated as a lawyer today.
When I was up at the college recently, I guess this was for your inauguration, but also for my own class reunion, a part of the campus is closed off because they're doing some work on a program to convert much of the college's electricity to geothermal. Tell me how that works.
Yes, so we have operated our system of energy on a steam plant, which was at end of life. And so we are converting to a more sustainable energy system that's called our geothermal system. Lots of colleges and universities are doing this right now, including Harvard's doing it, Smith and Amherst, who are in the Pioneer Valley with us in Massachusetts, are all converting. And we have a goal of being carbon neutral at Mount Holyoke by 2037.
What does it mean, carbon neutral?
So carbon neutral just means that the energy that we consume, we're also able to offset that through the use of more energy efficient, less pollutant energy like the geothermal system.
So you really get heat.
We bore down into the ground and take it up. Yes.
Wow.
And you can cool it, you can heat it, and it's a much more energy efficient system than the steam plant.
Mount Holyoke has another program that I've always been curious about, and that's the Frances Perkins program, which is for older women who want to get a college education?
Absolutely. Yeah, Frances Perkins is one of my favorite programs. So, of course, our Frances Perkins program is named after Frances Perkins, who was the first woman to ever serve in a presidential cabinet. She served as the Secretary of Labor,
Yeah.
and she was one of the architects of the New Deal, including an architect of Social Security. So, one of the most important women in terms of public service in the United States. And I think she's an excellent example of what we want these graduates to do. So, for example, I taught a Frances Perkins scholar last year. She was someone who's close to my age, and she had come from Montana. She and her wife both graduated with their degrees last year, and they really are examples of that program, having to stop your college degree many times for women because you may have had a child, or you may have gotten married, or you may have had to take care of elderly parents, but something that stopped you got in the way of you finishing your 4-year degree. And then we welcome those students to Mount Holyoke, see them graduate, and they graduate like the student I had, Phi Beta Kappa.
Wow.
These are students who are really leading in our environment, but also they provide that maturity and stability. When you see a student who may be in their 40s finishing their college degree and they're sitting right alongside students in their teens and in their 20s, it provides this incredible balance for our more traditional college students to not take for granted the fact that they were able to go on a traditional college path when they see some students who had to fight to get there and fight to finish their college degrees. But our Frances Perkins program is one of the things I'm most proud about at Mount Holyoke.
How many students do you have?
We have about 15
Okay.
Frances Perkins students
Okay.
currently on the
Okay.
campus, and we basically fund their education for the most part. So about 70% of all Mount Holyoke students have some form of
all
tuition
students.
of all students. And for the Frances Perkins students, we typically end up funding a lot of their education through institutional funds.
Now you have about 2 minutes to tell me what's on your bucket list of things that your priorities for what you hope to accomplish going
I
forward.
really want to see women's colleges recognized as a sector. We have really important work to do, very much like the HBCUs, and in the realm of helping women and people who are marginalized on the basis of gender around the world. So, for example, we had a student from South Sudan last year who wants to go back to South Sudan and help create a whole network of education for young women in that country. We know that there's so much more work to do on women's reproductive rights and on questions of women's health. And we want women's colleges, and they are really the center of that research of promoting that kind of equality, that kind of justice, and wanting women's colleges to really be recognized as a central part of how women and girls gain freedom and justice and great health around the world.
Because there are so many number of countries where they don't have the freedom to
Exactly.
get any kind of education.
Yes, and our students, 25% of them, 20 to 25% every year are international students. So when we're educating women at Mount Holyoke, we're educating women from around the world. So the benefits that come from a women's college here in the United States aren't just benefits for the United States, but they're benefits for China and India and Ghana and places all over the world in which women need even more recognition, even more ability to be able to achieve at the highest level.
Well, as I said, I was at your inauguration, and I shared the enthusiasm that I saw that for the talent and creativity you're going to bring as president of Mount Holyoke. And I wish you the best going forward.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at 121 CUNY TV. And you can now watch the show on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For the City University of New York and 121, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.